So now it's time for this week's feature interview. Recently, the London-based think tank, the Centre for Social Cohesion, published a report on how Muslim students view issues such as killing in the name of religion, establishing a worldwide caliphate, introducing Sharia law to the UK, setting up an Islamic political party in the UK, gender equality, the treatment of apostates and homosexuals, and the compatibility of Islam with secularism and democracy. Islam on Campus is the most comprehensive survey ever undertaken of Muslim student opinion in the UK, based on a specially commissioned YouGov poll of 1,400 students, fieldwork and interviews. The results show that while the majority of Muslim students don't endorse extremism, a very substantial minority do. Shah Network News' senior political sociologist, Tom Paine, asked the Centre for Social Cohesion's director, Douglas Murray, to explain why they asked the questions that they did.
The interesting thing about it is that there have been a number of polls in recent years polling Muslim opinion in Britain. But this is the first one that's polled, and the Centre for Social Cohesion did this in conjunction with the YouGov polling company. This is the first poll to poll Muslim student opinion in the UK. And there are several reasons why it's important, I think. One of them is that people often say what they think Muslims believe or what Muslims do, or from every imaginable angle. But actually, one of the most important things is asking Muslims what they think about issues. And the second thing is that, of course, Muslim students are likely to be the most prominent representatives and even perhaps, sadly, we still use the term leaders of their communities. So it's important to know what potential future leaders of the Muslim community and spokespeople for them perhaps are thinking. And it's also necessary because in Britain, and a lot of work's been done on this in the past, but in Britain, Muslim terrorists, Islamist terrorists, are far more likely to become terrorists if they've been to a university than not, which sort of always puts paid to the poverty angle that people say drives terrorism. But you're far more likely to become a terrorist in Britain if you've been to university. So, I mean, Omar Sheikh, the murderer of Daniel Powell, of course, attended the London School of Economics. Asif Hanif and Omar Khan Sharif went to King's College London before going to Mike's Place in Tel Aviv and blowing that up. So we clearly have a problem with universities. At the same time, we know that future representatives of the Muslim community are going to be going to those universities. So it's very important to know what they're thinking on a whole range of issues. And that's what we've tried to do. And by asking questions and in follow-on questions, hopefully we've shown the most comprehensive poll of its kind, showing what Muslim students in Britain are actually thinking.
Well, you've done the unthinkable and actually asked Muslims what they think rather than have journalists and politicians imagine what they think. What do they think?
Well, some of the findings, you won't be surprised to hear, are disturbing. They're very disturbing. Others show some cause for optimism. I mean, I would say that one of the things that the report showed is that the worst days of all, the 90s, where people like Omar Bakri where he was boasting that he was getting around 60 or so universities a week. I'm not sure if that's true, but people like him were very active on campus and allowed to be. Those days seem to be in the past. However, the picture is still very far from rosy and maybe getting worse in some regards, although it's very hard to tell. But I mean, figures like, for instance, 40% of Muslim students polled supported the introduction of elements of Sharia into British law. Previous polls have shown around this same figure. It tends to be around 40% of Muslims in Britain who support elements of Sharia law. It's important to stress that doesn't necessarily, or by a long shot, mean that they support, the cutting of hands and so on. But that elements of the law of Britain should accommodate Sharia. It tends to be around 40%. One of the disturbing things about this, of course, is this is the most educated group of people you could poll about this issue. And it seemed to me to be disturbing that figure crops up there.
Well, how disturbed can you be about this when you've got people like Lord Phillips and the Archbishop of Canterbury saying pretty much the same thing about Sharia law?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a very important point, exactly, that where does it leave progressive Muslims who resist Sharia when the Archbishop of Canterbury seems to be for it? But I mean, perhaps most disturbing of the findings, I thought, were that almost a third, that's 32%, of Muslim students polled said that killing in the name of their religion could be justified. And only 2% of non-Muslims polled felt the same way. 2% of non-Muslims polled felt the same way. And we really did allow a considerable breakdown on that one of whether killing in the name of your religion, then whether it was permissible in the defense of your religion or in propagation of your religion. And we've gone through all of those angles. But we tried to do the same thing with one of the other key issues, which is perhaps along with women's rights, is perhaps one of the most important fissure issues in this area, which is the issue of what happens, what should deem to be happened to apostates, people who leave Islam. And on this, we found that 6% of Muslim students polled said that converts from Islam should be punished, quote, in accordance with Sharia law.
Well, that means death, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And we even did that. There are higher figures for that from members of the Islamic societies. And I would urge your listeners to go to the report to see the breakdown of that, because inevitably people say, well, the question is biased or so on. And actually, we in this poll with YouGov have done everything we could to make sure that people have an opportunity to be aware of what they're saying. I mean, for instance, we don't just say, do you think that people should be punished according to Sharia law if they leave Islam? We do a follow-on question, which is your understanding of that Sharia law is death? And you still get a percentage who say, oh, yes. So actually, we allow significant fall-off from people who are saying yes but are ignorant of what they're saying yes to, or maybe.
Well, there's a fairly substantial minority of Muslim students, obviously, that have very disturbing views, but there is a majority who don't. Are you encouraged by at least that fact?
Yes, I mean, it's always a sort of a tricky one, this, isn't it? I mean, as it were, if you do a poll, as has been done in the past, and you show that only 1% of Muslims in Britain might be interested in terrorism-related activities, or there's always that problem of, you say, well, great, 99% aren't, and that is, of course, terrific, but even 1% is deeply problematic, and that's the same case here. I mean, there are some, I suppose, positive findings, I would say, and some findings which, there's room in to sort of see how a future progressive generation of Muslim students could emerge. I mean, while there are figures like, a quarter of Muslim students, or 24%,